If you've ever interacted with me online in any sense, you'll probably recognize that I do enjoy a little bit of playful trolling. Sometimes it's fun to just be the Joker and chase the car and you don't know what to do when you catch it. Sometimes it's fun to troll people online. And game respect game, if you are the type of creator that has the audacity and boldness to be able to make a fandom and then just kind of poop on them intentionally, I have to recognize that. You have to be able to applaud an author who already exists in a niche genre that is reading, and books take so long to read, and authors are usually really grateful to help out their readers and to give them something that they didn't know that they wanted. Well, sometimes the thing I didn't know I wanted is to see an author intentionally screw over some portion of their fan base with putting something in their books that's just like mean. Today we're going to talk about 5 authors who took the time to create a pearl in some sort of oyster, and then when you go to get that pearl, right before they hand it to you, they sneeze in their hand and go, "Here. I made this for you!" On one hand, you're like, "What the frick, man? Why would you do this to me?" And on the other hand, you're like, "Nice." And so yeah, 5 authors who hate their readers. Let's talk about that. Brian Jacques was a very sweet man who decided that he wanted to use his writing ability to create stories to inspire a younger generation. Using creative stories starring anthropomorphized animals, heroism, and tales of adventure, and also, even though he was writing to a young audience, he really wanted to just tell you how hard the world can be. Though his books were typically found in the young adult section of the library that I went to, the relatively accessible nature of his world and the moderate parental friendliness to young readers, I always felt like this was a series that was aimed at like middle grade children. The only exception is that for middle grade books, it could actually be fairly violent and descriptive of that violence. And these books are full of wonderful, happy moments where there's like celebrations with food that sounds delicious to eat and characters that are hilarious and friendship bonds that just can't be broken. But secretly and subversively, I think Brian Jacques wanted to tell children about death and how bad that can suck. So many times this series contains sacrificial heroes who died on their quest to save the world in the relative small area that they lived in. And time after time, I was brought to tears when I read this book as a young person because he just liked to kill amazing characters. And not only did he like to kill amazing characters, he liked to introduce villains that were sympathetic, so you didn't know how to feel when the final conflict happened and people would die. These are children's books. Some of the themes that are contained in these books are things that would affect me to my core to this day, and Brian Jacques was like, "Hey, you can give this to children." There was a PBS show for Redwall, for goodness sakes. This was something that was advertised to children. He was like, "Hey parents, I will teach you a story of heroic sacrifice and love and bonding, and also people that you love will die. In real life, people will die and there's nothing you could do about it, and sometimes it's not even worth it. When you're young and impressionable and you just want to know what is good and what is bad, sometimes the bad guy, he has a reason for doing what he's doing and you're like, I kind of feel that." And then the hero and the villain come to a conflict and you're like, well, maybe there's a better way. Like maybe they don't have to kill him. And then people die and you're like, I'm 10, bro. And he was really good about holding this sort of facade of a character that he had because he seemed like such a sweet man when he was alive. He seemed so interested in getting characters to be drawn into reading and the power that can be contained within the story of fantasy. But I think really all he wanted to do was scar young children, and do it he did. I find myself to be an odd combination of optimism and extreme pessimism, and I think Brian Jacques is to blame for both, maybe? Thank you, Brian Jacques, but also screw you. Kicking it back a few years, let's talk about an author who is widely praised for having extremely important books for writing in his day. We're going to be talking about Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo, author of Les Miserables, also was the author of a book called The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which turned into a Disney movie at some point. I don't know if you've seen that Disney movie recently, but holy frick, speaking of dark things that are aimed at children, what on earth was happening with that movie? Anyway, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the book, contains many of the dark elements of that story, but this author, I don't know what his purpose was in writing this book. If you've never read The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I don't think you can fully understand the gravity of what I'm talking about here, because if I asked you, what is the story of The Hunchback of Notre Dame? Maybe you've seen the movie, maybe you remember reading some version of this book when you were a child, but it has to do with like Quasimodo and Esmeralda and that knight dude, whatever his name was. Maybe in some like weird way, this is like one of the earliest grimdark books, because the book is dark, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. Unlike Redwall, this book I don't think was written for children, but honestly I'm not sure who this book was written for, because even though those are the elements of The Hunchback of Notre Dame that you're familiar with, the majority of this book has nothing to do with that story. I would go so far as to say, in my memory, maybe only 1/3 of the book contains parts of the story related to the main characters. You see, Victor Hugo was an author with a little bit of a stick up his butt about something unrelated to the story of Quasimodo and Esmeralda. Victor Hugo was not familiar with the term editor as we know of editors today, because there's no way that if he tried to publish this book in a modern world that it wouldn't have got completely broken into 2 books, 3 books, 0 books, because he wouldn't have been published. Have you ever been watching a movie or reading a story and it seems like the author is only using the plot of the story to try to sneak in some other message? Like there can be a lot of super overt imagery and they're really trying to push some sort of agenda, but they're trying to hide it under the guise of the story. Victor Hugo, he doesn't care about hiding it at all. You see, Victor Hugo was super into the idea that architecture as an art form was being lost as we started reaching the more practical realities of the future and eventually the industrial sort of movements. Most of The Hunchback of Notre Dame is spent intricately detailing the view of Paris, where this cathedral is located, in exquisite, painstaking detail from not only the perspective of someone viewing the city from the ground, but also from the skylight. There are full-on essays in this book about the importance of architecture as art and the way that he shows the city block by block at points, and the way that he'll tell a tiny bit of the Quasimodo story, and then the way he'll spend chapters detailing just what the city looked like. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I tell you, just a simple picture of both the skyline of Paris and the ground level of Paris was worth much, much more than that to Victor Hugo. Thousands upon thousands of words in this book are dedicated not to a story you might have signed up for, but to something entirely different, which is just the rantings of an aging man who was seeing culture pass him by and he was not okay with it. Victor Hugo teased you with a story, but what he actually gave you was his strong personal opinions. And while that can be really difficult and annoying to read, and you're like, why did this dude not have an editor? Is he the Peter Jackson of books, but worse? On the other hand, you have to just respect that level of, I'm gonna say what I want to say, and I don't give a frick if people want to read about it. If they care about this story, they're gonna know what I think about Paris and how it used to be beautiful and how people used to spend hours and hours building architecture to show the magnitude of what could be done through human achievement. Look at the buildings that you have today. They are nothing. They mean nothing. They make me feel nothing. The only reason they exist is to purely serve a purpose, and I hate it. That's Victor Hugo. I don't really feel that strongly about the subject personally. The next series I would like to talk about with you today is the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. If you've heard anyone talk about the Kingkiller Chronicles, they will most likely talk to you about the beauty of the prose and the masterful way that Rothfuss is able to paint a picture with words and really draw you into a story about Kvothe and his early life and the way that he goes about his school, the way that he tries to learn about magic, and it's poetic with the way that he really starts to build this world out in very specific ways. The longer I spend ruminating on the series, the more I realize just the depth that exists within this world. And channels like Captured in Words show just how many teases of extreme lore and theorizing you can do on this magnificent set of 2 books that exists for the Kingkiller Chronicles. The promise of the Kingkiller Chronicles is having a series that is so tightly designed, where every single word had blood, sweat, and tears, blood, sweat, and cried over, so that everything is foreshadowed and it leads you on a path that is unlike any other book. But Patrick Rothfuss has not written the 3rd book in the Kingkiller Chronicles in a significant period of time. The Wise Man's Fear, the 2nd book of the Kingkiller Chronicles, was published in 2011, and I don't know if you've seen the date that this video was published, but it is now 2022. It has been 11 years since we've gotten the conclusion of this supposed trilogy. And honestly, based on the hearsay that I've followed around in the booktube community, his editor said they never even saw any portion of this book. Like, it's like he wasn't writing for 10 of those 11 years. He says he's writing it now, but who's to say if that's accurate? I won't believe anything until a book is sellable on store shelves at this point. But the real reason why I want to bring this up is not just the fact that he has not released the 3rd book in 11 years. The real reason why Patrick Rothfuss gets the gold star for a troll of an author who may actually hate their audience is the fact that since this book does not have a conclusion, since the series does not have a conclusion, and since the series may never get a conclusion, every single bit of the wonderful crafting that I just described and the way that everything feels like a puzzle piece that's going to click together, none of it does. It's just all promise with no deliver, and some of those promises don't make any sense at all, because we have nothing to tie the reasons why some of the things in these books happen together. Reading the Kingkiller Chronicles is not only a broken promise, huge sections of the book feel like they make no sense. Like, you wonder why pieces of this story exist. It's like a side quest on a side quest on a side quest, where during the side quests, you get so Inception level deep in this series, you can forget what the book is even about in the first place, because every single time you go to a new area or explore something new, it's given the full Rothfuss focus and treatment. But then you start to wonder, if you just take one step back and be like, why is this part here? And I'm not just talking about that part in The Wise Man's Fear, which a lot of people seem to find really jarring and weird. I'm talking about almost everything in these books. You see, while most books have an arc where they set up something and then they pay off that thing within the series of the books, but there can be parts that lead you to want to read the other books, or mysteries that continue to go on that you wonder where they're going. Almost nothing in these books has any sort of conclusion. It's all journey, and there is no destination. There's no destination. When I was talking about Victor Hugo, I was talking about how an editor would have cut a lot of things. If you look at these books and you read them and you just read all the things that we have right now, you start to wonder, how on earth did any of this get put in here unless it was put here for a reason that was to happen later on? But since there is no later on, Patrick Rothfuss is the greatest troll by leading you full circle on a wild goose chase for a story that doesn't only have no end, it has no, I don't even know how to end that sentence. It's like the books. While I absolutely love reading the Kingkiller Chronicles, I wonder, why are we doing what we're doing so many times in the book? How do we drift so far off the main course? And there are hints that maybe there's reasons things tie together, but the fact that they don't tie together makes it all the more strange. I dare you to pick up this series right now and tell me why most of these scenes exist. One could argue the journey is the important part, and all of these things are part of the journey. But Kvothe goes so many places, so many things happen to him, and they just don't piece together. So is it just going through this journey from place to place in his life, and he builds up all of these things, but what is the point? Like, is this some meta narrative on purposeless in meaning? Like, is Patrick Rothfuss one of those type of dudes? In reality, did he ever plan on finishing this trilogy, or was he trying to perform the trolliest performance art ever by making you think that everything here was incredibly amazing and purposeful and intentional, and he meant to leave us hanging the way that he did? What the crap? And this one is like a troll that gets me so hard every single time I think about Kingkiller, because as I admitted earlier, I kind of love it and I can't stop thinking about it, but I don't know why. What is the point? Is there a point to anything? Patrick Rothfuss, are you that devious? Is this your goal? Go watch a caption and word theory video from the series. You likely won't have too much spoiled for you because he goes so deep on the breadcrumb trails that are left in just little tiny pieces of the book and told in the crazy amounts of stories that happen in the book and all of the random prophecies and little lines that are thrown out there. They're going so many directions and there's so many places and so many cool things that could happen, but none of them do. Can we get a standing ovation for Patrick Rothfuss and everything about the Kingkiller Chronicles? Thank you so much. The next author and series I would like to talk to you about here today is by Stephanie Meyer. It's called Twilight. You may have heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, or you haven't read it, or you haven't watched the movies, may I recommend my series of videos on the subject? Also, where the heck have you been? Twilight was a phenomenon that took the world by storm when I was a teenager. You could not escape Twilight. And just in case you don't know what Twilight is, you haven't read it, and you still care, I'm going to be spoiling Twilight as I talk about this. There will be timestamps in the description down below so you can skip past the Twilight part, but let's continue. A huge part of the Twilight fandom, and the reason why it got so big, was because the series contained a love triangle. Bella Swan, I almost said Bella Thorne, not the same person. Bella Swan had a little bit of a love triangle in the series between two characters, Jacob Black and Edward Cullen, the vampire and the werewolf. If you've ever read paranormal fantasy, vampires and werewolves hate each other, but Bella liked both of them. And both Jacob and Edward display two sides of the same coin, as far as this is like a fantasy about two super attractive, very different and very sweet and fun in their own ways guys who were both madly in love with Bella. And fans of this series, like many popular YA series, really got into factionalizing over the ships in the book, the relationships that they were teasing in the book. There was Team Jacob and there was Team Edward. There were t-shirts, arguments, videos, discussions on people that were Team Edward and people that were Team Jacob, especially in the book New Moon. They really allowed Jacob to flourish and show off a lot of his cool characteristics. And I think Stephanie Meyer did a maybe too successful job at painting these love interests in ways that the fandom might identify with. The problem was it was very, very obvious to Stephanie Meyer who she thought the correct ship should be. And I've never read this anywhere, that when she wrote New Moon and realized that so many people ended up being Team Jacob, she was ticked. I definitely think that Stephanie Meyer wanted to do a little bit of a tease with Jacob, and she wanted to create sympathy for his character where Bella kind of liked him, but it was a struggle. But I don't think she ever wanted that to be a viable option. And I think the fact that so many of her fans loved Jacob as a romantic interest for Bella, that she began to become bitter. The way that the Twilight series progresses through books 3 and 4, I think that these books, and especially Jacob's parts of these books, were written to intentionally give the middle finger to people that happened to have thought Jacob was a better love interest than Edward. So obviously Stephanie Meyer was a huge Team Edward fan. And in book 3, she starts to write Jacob more like a jerk so that the fans will not want Jacob to be a love interest. But I don't think it worked. There were still a lot of people that were like, I understand why he's so angry. I understand why he's so mean now. I really want Bella to be with Jacob, which is where we get to what she gets to in book 4 of the Twilight series, where she hated fans of her own book so much that she wrote Team Jacob fans into a corner by having him fall in love with the daughter of Bella. He falls in love with her daughter, and it's implied that he did so before she was even born. Stephanie literally writes that Jacob was not actually in love with Bella. he just thought that he was because he was actually in love with her egg? I don't know, but there's literally there's a scene in the Twilight movie where Jacob sees this child. I have no words to describe the insanity of writing that as a plot point in a story. Can you imagine hating your fans so much and creating a character that your fans love so much and you don't like the way that they like your character, that you intentionally write him into a corner where people that were wearing Team Jacob shirts before now are embarrassed and ashamed and they have to go hide because people think that they might be insane? This is top tier level author trolling. I don't know if I could ever think of an author who hates their audience as much as Stephanie Meyer did for Team Jacob fans. On the subject of authors intentionally screwing their fans over when it comes to relationships they would love to see, I'm going to have to spoil the Stormlight Archive, at least the books that we have available to us. That is books 1 through 4 up to Rhythm of War. I'm going to be giving Stormlight Archive spoilers and talking about some of the relationships contained therein. There are timestamps in the description down below if you would like to skip the Stormlight spoilers. But now I'm going to talk about how Brandon Sanderson freaking hates his readers. In modern fantasy, you would be hard-pressed to find a list of people's favorite fantasy characters that does not include Kaladin Stormbleach from the Stormlight Archive, especially in The Way of Kings with his flashbacks and with the constant torture and suffering that the man is forced to go through. You really start to empathize with him, and so many people love his journey, not just through the first book, but over the course of the series thus far. Well, many fantasy readers love to see their favorite characters get good romance arcs. Brandon Sanderson has not always been the best about writing romance. He's really hit or miss when it comes to romantic elements in his stories. But you think that he would write a really cool romance for one of the most loved fantasy characters of our time, right? Through the course of the Stormlight Archive that we have thus far, we actually find out that Kaladin, including in the time period covered by the books that we're reading, has had multiple romantic relationships with women, and they all happen between books off page. That's right, on more than one occasion, I think maybe even 3 occasions, Brandon Sanderson has implied that Kaladin has been in a romantic relationship. He's tried to pursue a relationship with a woman. It went so far and then it fell through or whatever, but he doesn't put it in the story. It's just like a casual mention that it happened, and you're like, what the frick, man? This was covered by this book and you intentionally chose to skip it? Kaladin is a character we all just want to see be happy, and we want to see him try to date people. We want to see him get a hug. We'd like to see him find love, but instead, his only chances to find love that we've seen thus far, you teased us. You told us it did happen, it failed, but we didn't even get to follow the journey. His books are all about journey before destination. That's the whole motto in the Stormlight Archive, but he doesn't even give us the journey. He gives us just the sad destination, and we're supposed to be okay with that? The fact that Brandon did it again with Rhythm of War was next level trolling. Fans have already complained about that multiple times in the previous books, but the fact that in the new book, he teased that there was another failed relationship that happened between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, and you get to see none of it? It's insane! Wow, dude! Wow, man! Dog, I know that Brandon Sanderson does seem to like to troll people. You see his live streams where he sort of teases little things and gives out little tidbits, but come on. Speaking of teasing out little things and trolling, did we all forget about the scene for Words of Radiance? The scene where he spends time with Shallan, and I got chills, and I got cries, because they had one of the most beautiful, intimate moments where they shared their trauma together, and they finally began to understand each other. This would have been the best written Sanderson romance of all time. But at the end of Oathbringer, when there's been a little bit of a teasing of a love triangle, but we know that amazingly powerful, incredible moment existed in Words of Radiance. We know it's there, and we're all We're all rooting for Kaladin to find love, and it seems like he may just be able to do that with Shallan. Instead, what we get is the end of Oathbringer ends with it just getting shut down when Shallan marries Adolin. It comes relatively out of nowhere. It happens so abruptly. Between the two books, everyone was theorizing that maybe the wedding would get canceled, like there would be something crazy that happens and it wouldn't actually happen and we'd actually get to see a little bit more teasing here. But Brandon Sanderson said no. I don't know why you freaking like that love triangle. I don't care that I wrote one of the most romantic scenes in modern fantasy. I can't believe you thought they would get together. Shallan married Adolin, you idiot. And that's the moment in Rhythm of War, once we know that Adolin and Shallan are married. And when Rhythm of War drops and it's like, oh yeah, you didn't get to see that wedding either. Adolin and Shallan got married. You didn't get to see it. Also, Kaladin had another relationship, which I also didn't let you see. Sando, dude. Sando, man. Thanks, buddy. Thank you. Thank you so much for teasing us with this massive epic series that we're all so invested in, and you just couldn't care enough to tell us about something that we've been theorizing about and arguing about for years? Thanks, man. Thanks, dude. No, I don't care. No, it's just, it was nothing. I'm sorry. And that about wraps it up. There's 5 authors that hate their audiences and intentionally chose to just troll them into the next century with drawing them in with teases and then pooping all over their cereal. These are authors that chose to entice their audience to come in and slowly enter their door, only to kick them in the face and crotch chop over their lifeless body. While I may be slightly angry and I get a little passionate about this subject, like I said, I do have to respect the hustle. Huge shout outs to the authors mentioned today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it. If you thought there are authors that I should talk about in a future video like this, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, what did you think about the authors that I mentioned and the points that I brought up? I'd love to discuss them with you. Maybe in the comments, maybe also you can check out the link to my Discord, which is in the description. And hey, if you like what you saw in this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. You can come back some other time and hang out with me whenever I post another one. I'd love to have you back. I can't wait to see you again soon. I love you all. Goodbye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.